This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 239.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majraba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. My name is Ramsey Majraba, and I am your host for today, in case you didn't know that. If you did, well, welcome back. I'm happy to have you here. We're hearing all these stories about these different kinds of career paths into sales engineering, from teacher, hotel manager, many different untraditional paths. So James, my guest for today, James, let me make sure I get his name right. James Connor McCann reached out to me, and he's very active on LinkedIn. So if you don't know who James is, check him out on LinkedIn. His link is in the show notes, show 239, and he really wanted to talk about the traditional path because we don't talk about it anymore. It's not hip, I guess, is the word that the new kids use these days. So we wanted to talk about it and discuss his career path and why he thinks the traditional path is still very good. And he has a message for everybody towards the end. So keep listening, and I'll check back in with you after the show. Hello, James. How you doing?
Hey, Ramsey. Good to speak to you again. How's things?
I just discussed the family situation of everybody being sick, and hopefully things will get better. It sucks to be in winter in Canada with three kids.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, hope they recover soon, by the way. But yeah, it's similar here in Ireland. We're used to, the cold weather you're talking about, and the change of the weather's, quit the golf and, made people go back into the gym. So yeah, we're seeing that as well, and everybody's sort of, trying to transition.
Yeah, I mean, the kids are better now. They just cough at night, which means people are not sleeping. Anyhow.
Oh, yeah.
But we still have to function.
True.
So the way I usually start this, as you may know, I ask you to introduce yourself. So how about we start there? Who are you, and what are you doing here?
So my name is James. Good to speak with you again, Ramsey. So I am a pre-sales consultant for Presales, which is a dedicated business unit from MicroFocus, which specializes in cyber resilience specifically. So that is a cybersecurity role. I focus on data security specifically, and also data privacy and protection. And I've been around for what feels like a lifetime now. So I've actually been with the organization for 12 years and counting. So that's actually since I've graduated, I've been at the same company. So I originally would have started out in a support role, and I also did a support role for my placement role in university as well. So I've been in tech for 13 years, 12 of which is with MicroFocus and Presales. And I started off in support before transitioning to more of a solutions consultant, pre-sales role. So a number of years, seen tons of change from I've been there as well with various mergers and acquisitions. So I joined a company called Autonomy back in 2010. And they focused on enterprise search and records management. And then that was acquired by Hewlett Packard, which I'm sure many have heard of, which then split off to Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And then Hewlett Packard Enterprise was acquired with MicroFocus. And then MicroFocus now have a dedicated business unit called Presales. So I've seen tons of change, although I haven't actually went anywhere. And I've got to work with different territories as well in that time. So I used to just cover UK and Ireland, but I also now cover UK and A plus Netherlands and Nordics as well. So tons of change, some expanded territories. And I'm based in Belfast as well, by the way. And I've got to work with a few different technologies as well. So not just records management, but information management and governance, and also the data security space as well.
Okay. All right. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So when I graduated university, the only thing I knew about was like software design and verification.
Yeah.
Support wasn't something I considered or even thought about, although that was my first role out of university and I fell into it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember, but when you graduated university, was it your intention to go into support, or did it just happen to you?
So I was probably carrying that bass from the placement year that I had done. So of course the reason why we're talking today as well, Ramsey, is because we see a lot of benefits with the traditional route into sales engineering. But in terms of why I applied for a support role, when I actually was graduating, I did have that bias coming from a support background. I
Okay.
did also have an opportunity. I did have two job offers at once, so I did have a developer role as well, which I didn't take. And just thinking back on it now, my career would probably be a lot different if I actually did take that role, because you're into a different type of career progression. You're into a different role essentially. But yeah, I decided to do the support role. It wasn't something I necessarily envisaged doing or really wanted to get in over another department. It was just a case of, can I get into support or professional services were the two ones that were top of mind. So that when I seen that opportunity to get into a local company in Belfast, I took it.
So why was support or professional services top of mind and not engineering, even though you had the opportunity to do it? Well, not
Uh,
engineering, like software
so,
design.
yeah. So I done ICT in university. So that's information communications technology. It's
Okay.
quite a broad course, and there was some modules which focused on computer science. But I decided, based on my experience with university, that I wanted a more broad role. I didn't want to be pigeonholed, if you like, down the developer route. I would rather work in the more broader sense and get to work with customers daily, get to be face to face with customers, and get to have that broader knowledge. And you could maybe expand out into other roles from that.
Okay. So you went into support. That was your first role. I worked in support. That was my first role as well. It's very nerve-wracking because
Yeah.
you don't talk to customers unless they're pissed at you, generally speaking.
That's exactly right. So, me and coming from the pre-sales side, that you're essentially working with customers who are just about to purchase a solution. They're generally happy customers, or they're existing customers, and you want to expand their footprint. So essentially, you're essentially selling the dream, if you like, with the pre-sales or the sales engineering landscape. Whereas the post-sales support is a different journey. The customer has purchased the solution, and your job really is to keep the dream alive. So really, you want to keep the solution running. You want to keep that customer happy. And yeah, you're right. There, a big part of that is dealing with often frustrated customers, or sometimes angry customers, just depending on how many issues they have. If it's actually a real showstopper of an issue, if it's holding up a project which they're running on, or if it's costing them time, money, and resources as well. So yeah, right, you're right. A big part of the job is actually trying to defuse that scenario with the customer first before actually digging into the troubleshooting aspect.
My customers were like telecom companies like Verizon Wireless, AT&T, Orange, and I was in the escalation path. So I wasn't the first line of support. I was like third line support.
Yeah.
And whenever it got to me, that means there's an outage, and everybody's freaking out because we're like the customer's losing money. So it was a lot of like you said, managing the temperature, calm down, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, and fixing it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Did you
well,
find?
similar to us, by the way. I was so sorry for interrupting. Similar to us. So there was a tiered approach in our organization as well. So I was part of that top level team, and we referred to it as the SWAT team. So you'd typically be dealing with the hot potatoes that have been passed from the lower levels up, or the real showstopper issues, or the strategic customers if you're a dedicated support contact, or the issues which are the most complex essentially. Yeah. So there was no hiding in that role. You were really thrown in at the deep end, and you really couldn't hide. You just had to be able to handle that situation, that high pressure environment.
So you said you had tried it before, and that's why you wanted to go back into support. Why
Yeah.
would anyone want to go back into support?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I was carrying that bass, and I suppose it was just what I was familiar with. It was actually probably an easier role, which I had done originally. Well, it was definitely an easier role because I was working in a local healthcare organization, and that type of support is much, much different than supporting, application support, working with enterprises. It's a totally different type of support. So I did have that bass, but yeah, I'm glad I did do that transition, just because it did get you that opportunity to build up your technical base on lots of the soft skills as well.
Okay. And I'm looking at your LinkedIn, it seems that you were in support from 2010 to 2013, and then you switched to technical solution consultant. What did you know about? I'm assuming that's the sales engineering role, technical solution consultant.
Yeah, so that's yeah. So originally I started off in support and then joined the solutions consultant role. And that solutions consultant role was a bit of both actually. So you had a bit of post-sales, you had a bit of pre-sales, and then I took it upon myself to focus more on the pre-sales side, and then that gradually just evolved into a pre-sales role, if you like. So there's a bit of both in that.
Okay. So what did you know about the role before you did you apply to it? Did they recruit you? Did they entice you to it? How was that interaction?
So for me to switch over to pre-sales, I had sort of thought at one time that I'd done enough in support and I wanted to try something new. And I remember one of the phrases that the pre-sales boss at the time actually said to me. I pinged him, asked him, was there any roles going? And he said to me, you're right. The sales team have more fun. That's literally a quote that stuck in my head, and I thought, that's probably right. The pre-sales people, they're going to be out in front of customers more. They're probably going to be getting to travel just slightly more, getting to a change of scenery occasionally, and working with new technologies, being pushed into more of the sales side. And he just said as well that the sales side of the business was a more interesting place to be, and I thought that that's also what I wanted to do as well. But worth noting as well that if you do decide to stay in support, there's absolutely no issues with that. I know plenty of people who have made very good careers just staying in support as well. But I just thought it was something that I wanted to try in terms of moving over to the sales side.
So did you work with the sales? Like you pinged the sales SE manager directly, so you must have known that person. Did you work with the sales engineering team before?
Yes, yeah. So if you are working in support, you're going to be working with tons of different departments. So one of them will be the sales engineers. So if you're talking to anybody from pre-sales and they have an issue with their environment, there's a very good chance that that environment is actually a demo environment which is broken or needs fixed, or it's also a POC environment. So we had exposure to POCs, we had exposure to deadlines. When a case is raised, they're saying this POC needs to start, tomorrow, for example. We need to get this up and running. We need to get these use cases up and running, and you would have to go through the product in a very granular way to actually get that set up. So in a sense, we did have exposure already to the pre-sales world and getting those environments set up. And yeah, I did know already, the art of a demo, because that's another thing that I would have done as well in the support world. Because if you do have a good relationship with a customer and you're the dedicated support contact, so in a sense, I was also doing a technical account management role for a while, because yes, I'm in support. I was in that top tier, but it was also, if you like, a named support contact for a few different customers as well. And that meant that they could just pick up the phone and get to me straight away, instead of going through the usual case of going through the support portal. And there would be, sometimes there's delays doing that. And if you want to run through the process to actually get to that top tier, you have to go to the bottom one first, so they could circumvent that, go to the top level, get that dedicated contact. But if they've got that good relationship, they can also say, hey, James, can we actually see the new features in the latest patch, for example? So you would actually be doing a demonstration, if you like, of that new release. And so there was a bit of overlap anyway between what you're currently doing and also the pre-sales side too.
Yeah. I mean, so when I worked in support, a lot of times it wasn't the customer that comes to us directly, but we had good relationships with the account team, with the sales engineering team, who whenever like the customer would go to them and then they would come to us and try to bypass. And I do that all the time right now with my current role, where, hey, I have a hot issue. I need to bypass first tier support, second tier support, just go straight to the expert that I know has worked on a ton of my stuff. And it's a good relationship to have from either side, as a support engineer and as a sales engineer.
Yeah.
So, and as a support engineer, yeah, like I had a lot of chances to do demos. I wasn't smart enough to take them up and ask for more, but not knowing if I was back, if I knew then what I know now, yeah, that's a sentence. Then I would have asked for a lot more. So
yeah.
how go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was also going to say that there is also that extra insight that you get if you're actually working in support as well. So it's if you're working on pre-sales, as we know, we're going to be working with customers for certain opportunities. We're going to know what products that they would like to possibly purchase. We're going to help enable them to get skilled up in those products, help them buy, if you like. And if successful, we're going to hand over to professional services or a partner network, and they deploy the solution, and they'll have an idea of what use cases the customer will actually use for that period in time. But as we know, the use cases can expand over the years. So just because it's been implemented for a certain use case doesn't mean 6 months down the line a customer won't find a new way to use the product, or they'll start focusing on something else. But if you are actually working in the support team, one of the big benefits, I think, is that you get to see how customers are using the solution day to day. So you can actually see the support tickets coming in. You can sort of build up a library, if you like. You can build up use cases for each particular customer. You can say, the different size of the architecture they're using. You can also build up a library based upon, the processing or the throughput that they're getting. And you can build up these sort of case studies that you can reference for other customers too. So you do have that extra insight into when and how people are using the solution. And the other thing is if they're not using the solution as well. So there is that sort of tie-in with a customer success role as well, because you can actually flag at-risk customers. If you have a customer, for example, and they have 2 years left on their support maintenance agreement, but you haven't heard from them in 2 years, there's a very good chance that they're either not using your solution or they've moved elsewhere, or you could be lucky and everything's just running absolutely smoothly. But in most scenarios, you do expect to have some contact with the customer, so you could flag them as at risk. You can raise the alarm bells internally, get the customer success team to reach out, or you could just reach out yourself. Those are some things that the support team has extra insight into compared to the other teams, in my opinion.
So we never had that. Like, I like that you guys had that, but we, as a support engineer for my previous company, we never had that option or that ability. We just, tickets came in, we just worked on them. We didn't have a dedicated person. So it's interesting to hear that. One thing I don't like about support is the fact that a lot of our work can lead to upselling or can lead to keeping the customer happy. But I never found support get rewarded enough for that work, because we worked long hours. If we get a ticket on Friday at 3 p.m., we're working till 10 p.m. trying to figure that out. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, totally agree with that. And that's something that can frustrate some people who've been working in support for a while. Support have KPIs to meet, but they don't have the same targets that pre-sales person or another department would have. Their big target is keeping customers running, whereas you don't necessarily get rewarded if you help to retain a customer, because as you know, if a customer's in escalation mode, they can sound the alarm bells, and you've got tons of people looking over the case. And if you like, it's a mini project that you're actually running from that point forward, because you've got all the management from the customer side looking at it. You've got a lot of pressure on your own side to get all of the open issues solved for this customer before a certain deadline. And if you do resolve that, if you've got good management and the company is doing well, you might get rewarded from that. But if you don't, you probably feel a bit annoyed, because there's tons of pressure in that, and you have essentially managed a project on your own, if you like, and that's something that's not necessarily rewarded or added into the benefits of the support engineers.
And that's the main thing I don't like. You're at the mercy of someone else making that decision that you did the job well or not. And that's why I love sales engineering, where you sell, you make, right? You don't sell, you don't, like, there is no gray area. You did well, you sold, you didn't sell.
Yeah, there is that other sort of comparison you can make as well between pre-sales and support, where if you can imagine somebody is coming in and they want to buy a new Mercedes, for example. So they go into the car dealership and they can have a look through all of the different models of Mercedes. They can go have a test drive if they want, and a test drive, i.e. demo. They can also go to the vendor next door, have a look at their models, do the same thing, and then they'll come to an agreement and say, okay, I'm going to take this one. But the important thing is that the actual journey they're on, they're in a happy mood because they're excited to get this bit of tech, that there's a problem that they want to solve. You can help them solve that problem. Everything is good at that point. And essentially that is selling the dream, if you like. But if you can imagine somebody that has bought that Mercedes comes back into the garage 2 months later and they've got serious problems with their engine, or even just, you know, a number of small issues that they're seeing that is just slightly annoying them, that person is in a very different state now compared to when they first walked into the garage. And that's something that, you know, the support engineers have to deal with as well, sort of de-escalating that issue and defusing the situation before you start the troubleshooting.
I mean, it doesn't even have to be like a hot issue. It could be, hey, I'm in for a regular checkup, but you're treating me like crap.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just I have a question. Why aren't you answering my question? Or I'm asking you for an oil change, you're changing something else. That's not what I asked for. So I think support has a big role to play in making sure that the customers stay.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like they get rewarded enough for the amount of stress that they go through.
Yeah, I think it's good practice, you know, being able to handle customers like that as well. If a customer does come in and they're frustrated, or if they're irate, you know, if you can actually handle that scenario, if you can develop that thick skin and you can actually get the grips with how to commonly sort that issue out in terms of the management of the people before then discussing solution. Again, that's a perfect sort of skill that you can bring over to use as another trait for, you know, pre-sales or any other department as well.
Yeah, this sounds like a lot of like a kind of love letter to support engineers. So this is just, we're showing our appreciation.
Yeah.
But I am very curious. When you talk to the SE manager, he gave you some advice. But what was the interview process like, considering you're moving internally? Was it any different from an external move?
It probably was, because the product that I was working on at the time, it was actually one of the better performing products. It was still being sold, of course, and it was one of the better performing products in the portfolio which the pre-sales guys and girls were working on. So I was coming in as an expert in that product to switch over departments, and that transition was much more smooth for me than it could have been for if you're changing companies, for example, because you've got the tech skills already there. You probably have a lot of the soft skills. It's really just about making that transition and, you know, changing your way of selling to the value message and selling, and, you know, just putting your pre-sales hat on as opposed to just, you know, having the support hat on now.
Before you got there, like, I'm sure you talked to a few people in the interview process, right? Was there an interview, or did they just give you the offers like, hey, we want you, here you go?
Oh, no. So I had to do an interview. So I had to go over to London for the interview. I did speak with a couple of the pre-sales guys that were in the team as well, and they all give me good feedback. And I didn't want to hear just the good sides of the role. I said, you know, tell me everything. I want to hear what it's like day to day. I want to hear the good sides. I want to hear the bad sides of the job. I don't want to just, you know, walk in the job without hearing what the actual reality is like. So, you know, they did tell me what the harder things were, or what the differences was as well, that you have to change over. You know, the value side, the value selling part of that is definitely something that has to change in your mind when you're moving over. It's not necessarily how everything works. That's useful to know from a pre-sale side, but what you really need to describe is, you know, why it works, on answering the so what, in a sense, as opposed to just the how all the time. So yeah, just changing your mindset, and also including the storytelling aspect as well, because if you're in support, you're not necessarily a storyteller. You know, you will be able to reference some other customers, if you like, but the art of storytelling, getting that value across, that's something that you need to learn when you're making that transition as well. Plus, there is a lot of support engineers who may be introverted in some sense. I would consider myself an introvert to some degree, and there's a lot of support engineers, and they might be happy with where they currently are, and they might be happy with the current exposure they have in terms of getting in front of customers. Whereas if you're moving over to pre-sales, you have to be in front of customers more often, as in physically in front of them more often, and you have to get used to that public speaking aspect, plus also dealing with, you know, large audiences with conferences and workshops as well. So that's also something that you have to, you know, take into account. And this is all feedback that I was getting from the pre-sales people when I was, you know, going into that interview process as well.
And how did that help you figure out if you want the job? How did you know you want to become an SE to begin with, to go after that?
Because I'd watched a number of demos. I did like the sound of the role. I was familiar with, you know, all of the different aspects that were needed, and it sounded like a more exciting role to me than what I was currently doing. So that's the reason why I wanted to move over. Plus, just the personal growth aspect as well. If you're actually not used to being in front of audiences, large audiences, you're not used to, you know, speaking in front of people at conferences. You know, if you can actually just force yourself into those situations, you can actually sort of condition yourself, if you like, to be used to that. Whereas if you stay in support, you're not going to get that support exposure. I personally wasn't going to get that exposure by getting into those scenarios, so I wasn't going to be able to grow from that aspect, if you like. So that was another reason why I thought it was a good reason to move over, just for that personal growth aspect, and, you know, to almost knock out that sort of introverted nature as well.
Okay, and you've been doing this for 5 years, 6 years now? No, a lot. 8 years.
Well, so it's that middle role was a bit of both. So it's probably 4 or 5 years essentially in the pre-sales side. Yeah, and then there was that role in between was sort of a bit of both. So there was a bit of overlap there as well. So yeah, I'm very used to, you know, both departments, and I certainly don't regret making the transition. The pre-sales role has definitely been my favorite role to date. It's the support was great, but the pre-sales, in my opinion, has been a much better role, and it's better for your own development as well, and be able to, you know, build up both your technical and soft skills as well.
So you talked about the expectation. You're expecting to do this as a pre-sales engineer, which is why you went there. But how has the expectation differed from reality? Has it? And if so, how?
So yeah, as I say, I actually didn't mind the transition over, because I was fortunate enough to be, you know, considered an expert in that product that was doing well. Now, if I had been moving organization and going to a new product, and also having to learn the tech as well as all, you know, at the same time as getting used to the role itself, that would be a much steeper hill to climb. But I was coming in from a good position, whereas I knew the tech, I knew the product inside out, and it was really just a case of, you know, getting me in front of customers. So in a sense, I found the transition very smooth. But there will be, just depending on where you're coming from in the support world to the pre-sales side, it could be a bit more difficult if you also have to learn the tech as well. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I did find it smooth, but I would say that my upskill time was probably shorter than your typical SE. So we see SE, sometimes it can be 9 months or 12 months to actually, you know, be trusted and to be put in front of customers. Mine was much shorter than that, just because of where it came from in the organization, plus the tech as well.
Okay, in terms of the role itself, what you imagined the role to be versus what it actually is there a difference, or is it like pretty much similar? What you thought it would be, it has been?
Yeah, so back then, so pre-COVID, we used to do a lot more traveling than we currently do. So the traveling aspect was a bit of a surprise. I didn't realize that there would be so much travel back then, because we were used to jumping on flights quite short notice, sometimes 1 or 2 days notice. I actually flew to South Africa literally with 3 days notice to do a POC pre-COVID, which was fairly high pressure stuff, and you're not necessarily prepared for the trip. But it was off the back of another POC, and that type of scenario just wouldn't really come up in the support world. In terms of the support world, you're thrown into last minute high priority calls, but that's a totally different scenario as to, you know, mentally get prepared for a trip to go over to London or to some other country, for example, do this POC or do this demonstration very short notice. That part was definitely a shock to the system. That was a bit of a surprise, and we've seen that tail off significantly now since we're back back in the office on post COVID now. So that traveling aspect has certainly reduced significantly now.
So I kind of wonder if you had 3 days notice to go to South Africa. I'm assuming it's not like it's a full day flight to get there and to prepare. So did you actually have time to prepare for the POC itself?
Yeah, it was a bit of a unique scenario, that because we had done a POC. I'd done a POC over in London for a company there, and it was actually their headquarters are based in South Africa. So they were also running through the same type of process for the same type of solution, but they didn't necessarily speak to each other. So you had the headquarters who had already chosen their chosen vendor. There had been a POC process already in place. They had run 5 POCs for different vendors, and this was the UK side of the business saying, actually, we're going with this. We're going with this solution from MicroFocus. You really need to see this solution before we're going ahead with the solution in South Africa. So it was quite a high pressure moment, because the South African side of the business, the headquarters, they have the power to have a consistent message across the other regions. So what they pick is what would then be chosen in the UK ultimately. So there was the deal there was, you're going to win both deals or you're going to win none. So that was the scenario which I faced there. Luckily for me, the POC requirements were very similar to what I'd literally just finished in London. So it was a similar use case, slightly more detailed, and we'll let some extra scope creep in just because to give us that extra edge, because we're coming in there, we're not even in the selection process, and I just threw my hands up and said, listen, I'm going to open it up to any scope creep you can just to give us that edge. And that's something that was done, and it actually did give us the edge. So we did win that opportunity. But yeah, it was certainly an interesting week and an interesting few days preparing for that one. Again, extremely short notice.
So why was it so short notice? I know, like, you were working on something in the UK.
Yeah.
Was it not known, or was it like, how did it become?
It wasn't known. So we had just wrapped up the POC in London, and as I said, the South African side of the business and the UK side of the business, they don't necessarily communicate that often, but they did have this communication at that point. They found out they were both running through that same selection process with different vendors, and then that's when we had to get on that short notice trip to South Africa. So yeah, a unique scenario, but that's what happened.
Yeah, I'm curious, how would you deal with it today? Would you deal with it any differently?
So yeah, I don't think that scenario is going to come up again, because it was essentially more or less an identical POC. If that happened again, you would have to get on calls with the new vendors in South Africa. So we did have the initial call with the team over in South Africa. We got the headlines of what the requirements were. We didn't really have the full time to put the exact POC test plan and agreement in place. We had the headlines, but I just looked at it and said, it's almost identical to what we're doing here. We made a few adjustments, and yeah, we didn't necessarily have the same time to plan out the POC as we normally would, just because of how short a time we had.
Okay, all right. And so I think the whole genesis of our conversation is traditional path into sales engineering.
Mm-hmm.
We hear a lot about, like, hey, a hotel manager or a teacher switching, and they have a lot of the soft skills transferable. What are some of the transferable soft skills that I think you mentioned that there are some soft skills as a support engineer? What are some of the soft skills that are transferable from support into pre-sales?
So in terms of the soft skills, there's tons of similarities. So one of which is that deep technical knowledge, which you're actually going to get from the support world. So you can become an expert in a product, and you can actually be very self-sufficient as well if you're actually getting to carry over that existing product into the other part of the business, similar to what I had done. So you can become very self-sufficient if you're actually on a POC and you're running into issues yourself, or if you're running into issues, pre-demo, and there's only a half an hour left and you've noticed the system's not working, you're actually going to be in a much better place to fix that yourself. You're not going to hold up meetings, you're not going to hold up POCs. So you're going to be pretty self-sufficient with the deep technical knowledge that you would pick up with the support world and transition over. The other aspect is the big one is time management as well. So if you're in support, you're going to be dealing with sometimes 20 or 30 open issues as well. You're going to be spinning plates often. You have to prioritize your workload. You have to know exactly when the big issues need resolved by the most demanding customers. And again, that's something that transitions well over to the SE space as well. A few other ones that I can think of is the active listening piece. If you're not actively listening in support, you're not going to be able to diagnose the issue. And if you're not doing that in the pre-sales world, you're not going to be very good in the discovery calls either. Because the big part is active listening, which then leads to the troubleshooting and finding that that technical discovery, which both sides do as well.
Yeah. I think a big thing is support engineers don't trust the customers.
Yeah.
Because I've, as a support engineer, I've been given incorrect information by the customers, and I've used my active listening, but I've also used like my debugging skills to make sure that what the customer is saying is actually true. And it's the same thing as a sales engineer, where the customer thinks they want something, they don't actually want it, and you kind of have to pull that out of them. So I like that. I
Yeah.
want to add one more skill,
Mhm.
and that's selling. Because as support engineers, a lot of times we have to sell workarounds to our customers that may or may not be ideal.
Yeah.
And we kind of have to convince them and show them that it's in their best interest to kind of do it. So I just wanted to, I agree with everything you said. I wanted to add that bit on top.
Yeah. So, well, part of that is negotiating with customers as well, isn't it? So sometimes a customer can come to you and say, this is a top priority issue for us, and you have to sort of bring them back down and realign what actually is a priority issue, what's a a critical issue, bring them back into line, give them a comparison with somebody else, and also say what's an acceptable workaround, or what is an actual fix. Some customers sometimes complain that if they're given a patch, that they would describe it as a band-aid. And then you have to really ask them what the impact of them actually implementing this is. And often at times the impact is minimal or non-existent. And then they will agree that actually this is a pretty reasonable solution. So we will go with that. Another one which I can think of is actually empathy, of course. So if you could you imagine being a support engineer, if you had absolutely no empathy, you'd probably have a very short career in support. They'd probably ship you off to a different department or even out of the business. The customer just wouldn't accept somebody that doesn't have empathy. And similar with pre-sales, that's one of the big skills you need to have. So you do need to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the customer, and then also do that first before then trying to to pit slap them, essentially, as we refer to it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, we don't always, I think you kind of used a bunch of different skills. We don't always have to believe to have empathy. Like, we don't have to agree with the customer to have empathy. That's not the definition of empathy. The empathy is understanding and knowing where they're coming from. And then we have to use our negotiation and selling skills to convince them that I don't understand where you're coming from, but are you sure you're looking at it the right way?
Yeah.
Right. And
I think another big one is actually that both support and pre-sales are expert collaborators. I think there's tons of collaboration between both departments. Both of them worked, very often with customers. So of course, if you're in support, you're working with customers day to day. You're going to be working with the product management in terms of raising issues, determining when to prioritize them, and you're going to be negotiating with them in terms of when to actually fix those issues as well. You're going to be working with professional services if they've got any custom solutions which you need to be aware of as well. Plus, if pre-sales have, if they're working on a broken POC or a broken demo environment, you're going to be collaborating all the time on creating a documentation that doesn't exist. I think both organizations or both departments are good at doing that. Plus, you have to be up to scale and have some relationship with third-party integrators as well. So the solutions often integrate with tons of solutions, so you have to work with those other teams as well. So tons of collaboration happens across both support and also pre-sales as well.
It's so funny because when I worked in support on the same floor in my building, we had support, we had network design, which is kind of like professional services, post sales. We had second tier support. We had everybody you would work with as a support engineer, and the floor was very loud. People were talking, people were chatting, people were trying to solve things together. And then you go up one floor to the software design team. Nothing. It's like church. It's like a church. I'm in there. I'm like, I don't know what's happening right now. I'm not used to this. It's too quiet. I'm leaving. Like, it was eerie. So yeah, so like that department, everybody in support, there's a lot of collaboration. People just can't just sit in the cubicle and do their job, because when we're trying to solve problems, having a discussion, like you and I we work on something together. We work on it much faster and much better than me trying to figure it out all on my own.
Yeah.
We're about to move on to the not so fire round, James. But before we go, I want to make sure that, did I give you the chance to speak about everything you want to speak of? Is there anything else you want to chat about?
Yeah. So I suppose the message that we're sort of trying to get across was that there is a lot of people coming in from non-traditional paths into the sales engineering, and they're doing two steps in one, if you like. They're coming in from military experience, they're coming in from HR backgrounds, from accountancy, from teaching backgrounds, and they're doing two jumps at once. They're doing jumping into tech is one, and the second one is jumping straight into sales engineering, which is fantastic, and it has been working. But there's probably going to be a small percentage of those people who are going to struggle, or they're going to be waiting longer to get into sales engineering till there's just naturally, that's just going to be the way of it. But there is an opportunity for those people to use this additional step, if you like, to use going into support or going into professional services, using that traditional route. So you're jumping into tech as one step, and then your second step, which will be broken into a different step, will be moving into the sales engineering. So it's an extra avenue for those people who are struggling to do those two steps at once. I think that was the important message we're trying to get across.
Yeah, I mean, we always try to go up the stairs 2 steps at a time because we want to get there faster, at least when we're younger.
Yeah.
But so I know now the value of just taking 1 step at a time. I don't have to jump 3 steps and then wait for 2 seconds because I pulled a hammy. Anyways, so I agree with that. All right. Okay, so it's time to move on to the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions I ask pretty much every guest, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it. And question number 1 is, as a sales engineer or pre-sales individual, pre-sales solution consultant, according to LinkedIn, what is your superpower?
Superpower, strong word. I would say I'd say grit. So you have to be used to hearing the no, or not being affected by external factors or external outcomes. As to whether you're working on a deal and you've been working on it for months. Some of these products have very long sales cycles. Some of our solutions do have long sales cycles as well, and there can be an external factor which can mess up the deal at the last minute. Unfortunately, it's just the nature of the game, but you can't let that type of result annoy you or affect how you're treating new opportunities as well. So you do have to have that grit and determination to keep going. I would say that's probably the closest thing to a superpower as I can think of.
Nice. All right, that's good. All right, the question number 2 is, what is one thing you would change about the role of sales engineering or pre-sales?
One thing I would change, that's a good question.
Thank you.
I would say that if we could be able to work even closer with partners and organizations, if we could get into the conversations with customers even earlier in the cycle, just depending on what salesperson you're actually speaking with. I always think it's better if we can be introduced as soon as possible, because we can have a different set of eyes onto the situation. So getting into conversations with customers and prospects even sooner than we do is always going to be a better thing for us, I think.
I agree with that assessment. All right. No, I'm agreeing with you way too much today. I feel like I should disagree with you about something. We'll find something to disagree with by the end of the call. Question number 3: is there a resource, a book, a podcast, whatever you recommend for aspiring SEs or new SEs to improve in their career?
Well, I would say, of course, you got your own podcast, but if somebody's listening to this, they know it already. So, you know, I'll not say yours. Yeah, they've heard it already. I also like the two pre-sales in a podcast. I do think it's quite useful. Don Carmichael and the rest of the guys. And I think an underrated resource is probably LinkedIn. So if you can actually see who's posting anything valuable in terms of pre-sales or sales engineering, you could check out the usual hashtags that you would check: pre-sales, sales engineering, whatever. See what's being posted. Those are probably good resources. You'll end up running into the people who are posting useful stuff, or the bigger people in the industry. So those are sort of some of the resources I would suggest.
You're very active on LinkedIn as well, so people should follow you. And I'll ask you in a second about your LinkedIn. But last question of the day, or the fire, not so fire on. Is there a habit you're working on today to improve in your personal or professional life?
Habit. Well, probably one thing is probably not even pre-sales related, but just getting back into the fitness aspect. So the weather's changed here, the golf season's over, and I'm just probably focusing more on going to circuit training, which is sort of like a high intensity class, and doing other exercise classes in the leisure center. So yeah, non pre-sales related, but those are sort of some of the things I'm focusing on at the minute.
A healthy body leads to better pre-sales. That's my opinion. All right. So we're at the end of our call, James. If people want to reach out and connect with you and follow you, because you do post some valuable stuff on LinkedIn, how can they do that?
Yeah, just search for my name on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to find me. That's going to be your easiest way. Just have a quick search on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, actually, the easiest way would be to go on the show notes of this podcast, and I'll have a link to that.
Yeah, we can do that too.
So, I'll add that there. Thank you so much, James. This was great. It was a great chat, and I wish I could disagree with you more, but everything you said resonated with me because I've been in the same career path, I guess.
All right.
Although I did change companies to get to a sales engineering role. That's the only difference. So thanks again for your time. Any last words?
Last words again. Yeah, just worth noting again that if there is anybody that's interested in getting into sales engineering, just to to keep your options open, and also consider doing that two-step process. So not necessarily going for a shortcut. Some of these people are doing two jumps in once. It's been very successful. But if you are struggling to do that, feel free to consider taking a role in support or professional services, building up your base, and then moving on if you choose to do so at that point. That's my sort of finishing messages. But I'd say again, good speaking with you, Ramsey. Always useful speaking with you, and I'm sure we'll speak again.
Hopefully, we'll talk soon. Thank you, James, for coming on. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this show. I think the big point that James was trying to make, and he made it very well, is that everybody's trying to jump straight from a non-technical role into sales engineering, which is very technical, and it's doable. We've seen people do it. Is it the best way? Maybe for some yes, for some no, but there are many people who are trying to break into sales engineering and can't, because you either need industry knowledge, technology knowledge, or customer knowledge, and they have none of those, and yet they're still trying to break into sales engineering. Maybe a better path would be to take another technical role, get a certification, AWS, learn coding, learn something technical, get a job with that, and then at some point, it's not a direct jump. It's not an easy fix. It might take time. It's going to take a lot of hard work, but it could be another path forward. And there's nothing stopping you from applying to all sorts of different roles. You can apply to sales engineering at the same time you're applying to support, kind of like what James did. So yes, I got pissed at myself for not putting my phone on mute. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. And that's it. I have multiple paths, multiple options ready to go, so that when one pops up, you're able to take it. If you blind yourself to other paths, when opportunities come up, you might not see it. So I'll leave it there. Check out the show notes if you want to figure out how to write an awesome resume. There's a link in the show notes below, and I'll leave it there. So with that, I'm signing off.